We are live, or at least I think we're live. I'm never quite sure because there's always a lag between OBS and the actual go live. So look, people in the chat, let me know. And also, I'm technologically almost entirely illiterate. So I once did a stream where no one could even hear my guest. So that was fun. That was fun.
The benefits of chat, though, right? Because then they can tell you when you're messing up.
I know, except for I'm absolutely horrible, or I used to be. I'm getting better, horrible at monitoring the chat. I went like a full 20 minutes before people were DMing me going, nobody can hear what's happening.
And then you're like, okay, cool, awesome.
No one knows what's going on.
Exactly.
All right, so hi chat. I see people in the chat now saying suddenly Shannon. So obviously that means that we're at least on screen. So that's good. Yay!
My step.
Nailed it.
Absolutely.
Nailed it. Totally did it.
A flawless entry.
Flawless execution yet again.
Absolutely.
And potentially for the first time. So welcome everybody. I am very, very glad you're here, and I'm very, very glad to have my guest today. I'm going to let you know a little bit about where I came across Erika. Erika did a debate with Kent Hovind on modern day debates, and I tuned in to watch it because I was like, oh, I don't know who this is. This is fascinating. I can't wait to see what she has to say. And she just, your patience and breadth of knowledge in the field were something to be relished. I think you were infinitely patient, and I have respect for that. It's because I know how difficult it can be.
Well, I feel like in preparation, I've said this before elsewhere, but in preparation, I consumed so much Kent media that I feel like I kind of inoculated myself to his sort of isms, and he'd say something and I'd be like, oh, I heard that one before. Oh, there's that. Okay, well, have you ever seen a dog produce a non-dog? Hey, Kent, all right, yeah, let's run through come on, we don't have all day.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, I had a good time. I'm glad everybody else did because it was a little frustrating, but we got through it. So there we go.
I've never debated Kent because I'm not a debater at the best of times. So nor do I have the expertise in the field that would be required in order for me to do that job justice. But I have moderated a debate between Kent and Destiny. And
really?
Yeah. I'm not sure if you know who Destiny is. He's like
No, I saw that debate. It's coming back to me now. Oh my God, how was that?
I got drunk. I drank an entire bottle of wine. Because
there is a time and place for that, and I cannot think of a better time.
That's what I did. I said I will do it if I can drink an entire bottle of wine. And James said, do you need to? And I said, yes, I do. And yes, I absolutely do. That's the only way I can sit through this. So that's what I did. And I lost my patience a couple times, and I was the moderator. So I don't know how you did it. And I'm known for having more patience than most. And I lost it. So yeah. Props to you.
It really is about kind of turning your brain off for those certain portions where you're like, okay, keep it cool. Come on, we can make it through this, and because it's not about reaching Kent. Kent's mind is made up. His mind was made up 20 years ago.
Right.
But I know myself. I've gotten a lot out of watching other people have conversations with people like Kent Hovind. I think anyone who's previously, however long ago it may be, dabbled in that young Earth creationism upbringing, right. That's who that kind of thing is for,
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's not just about your current interlocutor. It's about the people in the audience, some of whom you may never hear from in your life, that are just listening because they want to kind of consume and absorb the information and assess the arguments. Those are the important people when you're engaging in these dialogues. And a lot of people focus on, owning the other person. Like it's really important to just own them. But sometimes just listening and presenting information and being patient is the most constructive approach for a certain group of people that are in the audience. They may be more receptive to that.
I think that's absolutely right. And God knows there have been people who have owned Kent before.
My friend Bill.
Yep, I know. I actually watched his debate. Was the last one I watched. I watched it for the second time, right before I got in, and I was just like, this is how it's got to be done, right? I mean, God.
Bill Ludlow.
I wish I'd had the chance to meet Bill. I was supposed to come on his show and talk about leaving younger creationism couple months before, I was like email corresponding with him. And when I heard the news, I was just like, that's a bottle of wine moment too.
He was a great, he was an awesome dude. He was, I knew him a bit, relatively well, but my boyfriend Paul, he runs a channel called Paulogia. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it.
Yes,
but
I absolutely have.
They were exceptional. Like, Bill had been on Paul's channel, like Bill's avatar, like that you see everywhere on his channel. Paul actually drew that avatar.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I can see that.
We're talking about Bill Ludlow for anybody who doesn't see. If you go check out his channel and watch that debate at some point in time, if you haven't seen it before, his debate with Kent is legendary.
Yeah, the material's timeless too.
Yeah, it's great. It was really great. But anyway, and enough about Kent. This isn't about Kent. I want to give you an opportunity to tell everybody who you are and what your background is and where they can find you, and then we're going to get into the discussion that both of us are like pumped about cognition.
So my name is Erika. I have a YouTube channel called Gutsick Gibbon where I go over paleoanth stuff, primate stuff, anthropology stuff. I'm doing kind of a series on mass extinctions because I think those are really cool too. And I've just been floored by the amount of encouragement and support in the science community in general, which has just been makes it an absolute even more fun to get on screen and talk about this stuff. I got my undergraduate education in animal science, and I picked up a minor in biology and then another one in anthropology kind of along the way. And then I'm currently pursuing my master's of research in primatology over in the UK. So generally primatology just consists of, conservation, evolution, ecology, and behavior of primates, of that entire order. So, there's a lot to cover, but God, it's so fascinating. And it really reminds you sort of where we fit into the grand scheme of things, and how little difference there actually is between us and our cousins.
Yeah, especially when this is one of the things that fascinates me, and I have next to no breadth of knowledge in the field, which is why I'm really excited to talk to you, to see where there's some overlap in socialization and how you sort of build hypothetical constructs around the study of cognition and social interaction in primates, and what that looks like, and how you sort of, I guess, quantify what constitutes cognition when you're doing research, which is actually a fascinating topic to discuss because there is overlap with humans. But in the field of psychology, one of the ways that's kind of the easiest way to quantify cognition is that we're able to verbalize and self-report. Like we have languages that we utilize to communicate with one another, and we understand each other's languages and can learn each other's languages. That's not something you can necessarily do with other primates. So what I find fascinating is learning about, the social overlap, how they build moral systems, and how you kind of quantify and recognize cognition. So that's it. That's a lot. That is a lot. So you being, I guess, kind of the expert, at least compared to me, because we had the discussion beforehand about how the more you learn, the more you realize there's so much more that you don't know.
Well, and it's a tall order, but I think we can tackle it at least on a surface level, or really go deep into certain levels, because when we ask the question kind of what is, first of all, consciousness, mm-hmm. and then further on to that, because you can't have cognition without consciousness. Right. How do you get into those sort of high levels of consciousness and cognition, which, not very scientific terms, but you'll find, I think, that when you go further and further into these concepts, the terms can get a bit vague. And for good reason, because, as someone deeply involved in psychology, that it's like we barely have a grasp on a lot of this stuff in our own species, let alone in others. So generally speaking, I would say that consciousness is kind of this emergent quality where an organism is capable of responding to their environment on a basis of positive and negative reinforcement, or like feelings, if you want to put it in like kind of a colloquial term. Because from a selection standpoint, it makes sense, right? If an organism receives positive metabolic feedback, they're going to want to do more of the thing that gave them that feedback, right? And if they receive negative feedback, they're going to not want to do that thing. So, if you get a burst of cortisol because, oh my God, like there's a big lion running right at me, I'm probably going to alter my behavior to be around less lions that cause this burst of unpleasant cortisol and stress.
Right.
So you can see that, once we had that emergence, just, it doesn't even have to happen multiple times, really. You just have to have that first emergence of this general awareness, not even of self, but just of what is happening up here, kind of. And it doesn't have to be like self-recognition to a point where it's like, I know who I am and I can pass the mirror test. Because generally speaking, consciousness is considered to have arisen with the amniotes, which was, 200 plus million years ago. So it's more than just a stimulus.
Oh, you froze for a second. Or did I freeze?
Response. It's an awareness that surpasses the stimulus response level. Oh, sorry, did I lose you for a second?
Yeah, for just 1 second, but I think I may have froze too, so I think that might have been my fault. So I'm sorry. So
No, absolutely.
You said a couple things there that I find are really, really interesting, and one of the ones that I want to hone in on is the idea of passing the mirror test, like we would colloquially we would refer to that as self-awareness. Like that's our metric of when we're aware of our own existences. So do you see within other primate species a level of self-awareness? Do you think that's necessary for cognition or consciousness, or do you, and to a certain degree empathy, which we incorporate into moral systems? I'm getting ahead of myself, but
yeah.
Do you see that in any primate species?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's entirely dependent as far as is self-awareness in the way that we measure it with the mirror test necessary for cognition? Right. Absolutely not. Okay. Because, we see, for instance, there's this fascinating trend where it's like all of the great apes can pass the mirror test. And for those of you who don't know, the mirror test is essentially you put a dot on the forehead of an animal, of a great ape, and then you put them in front of the mirror. And based off of whether or not they reach for themselves or reach for the mirror tells you, does this organism recognize that they are themselves, that reflection is them rather than another animal or perhaps a picture. So all great apes can pass this test somewhat intuitively. And for a long time, it was generally thought that monkeys, your sort of old world monkeys, macaques, baboons, and then of course all of your new world monkeys, the platyrrhines, couldn't pass this test. But a study that was done in about, I think it was 2017, found that with some practice and coaching, rhesus macaques can pass this test too.
Oh, interesting.
And so the question is, okay, do they then understand that true awareness? Do they really understand that is them, or is it more of a rewarded behavior? And for a while too, that was the question. But when you run this test on humans, what's interesting is that children 1 to 2 in suburban areas in the Western world understand this intuitively. But if you go to rural areas in the West or elsewhere, it can take them up to 6 years of age to pass that test intuitively. So is this really, are we testing the right thing here? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, and I'm not 100% sure, at least how I personally would alter the mirror test. It certainly does give us information about how aware the animal that's being tested is of themselves. But it doesn't really test aptitude, does it?
No, I think it more so tests your ability to recognize your own personal aesthetic more so than your existence. Right. It's your ability to say, to recognize yourself visually, right, not recognize that you exist in the sort of existential sense of being aware that you're maneuvering your way through the world and doing things and interacting with people, and that you want to avoid harm, and that you want to, mate and build relationships. It doesn't test any of that. It just says I can recognize that this is my own reflection. That's all it really does test. But it's right, very difficult to quantify how to determine somebody is self-aware before they're able to produce language. It's incredibly difficult to determine that.
Well, and the emergent language, I'd love to talk about. I have some great papers to share with regard to language, but you're absolutely right. And two, there's the consideration of, okay, well, how do you recognize yourself in the mirror? Well, you see a lot of mirrors and you recognize that your reflection does what you do, or your reflection in, say, a pool of water or whatever. So it would kind of make sense that if you're living in a rural area, at least as a human, that it would take some time, a bit more time to kind of realize that. Because you're right, it's an aesthetic thing. How do I look? Right. Generally speaking, we look to the concept of like the theory of mind, right? It's like, can you tell that others make inferences? Can you empathize? Can you kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes? And there are some really neat experiments that have been done with chimpanzees, common chimpanzees, on whether or not they can tell that. There was a study done, I think it was by Tomasello in 2011, where they took chimpanzees and they set them in front of two boards. Now, one board is slanted and the other is flat. And the interesting thing is that intuitively, if the chimpanzee has been sort of rewarded by this control of, okay, look under the board, maybe there's something underneath, and if there is, you get to eat it. It's usually a treat or a fruit or something like that. They can look at the boards and know, okay, the one that's slanted probably has something underneath it, right? Because it's disrupt. The one that's flat, it's level with the table underneath. So every time, if they get one choice, they go for the slanted board. But if you take two chimpanzees, and the second chimpanzee is aware that someone else has gone before them, then they will pick the flat board, because in their mind, they have kind of understood that the one who went before them has already inferred and picked the board with the slant.
Right.
Know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're capable of understanding that others know too that the slanted board has the prize underneath. So why waste your choice on the one that has the slant when the one who went before you probably already took it?
Right. So that shows an awareness of your environment and that other people's choices affect your environment.
Right. And they know that their constituents make inferences.
Yeah.
That the same ones that they do. Which is fascinating. When you think about how that study was designed. I never would have thought of that, that it's like, oh, okay, well, have someone else go first and then see what they choose. But yeah, this idea of a general theory of mind was kind of tossed back and forth for some time, whether or not primates have this innate ability to understand what others think. Because, in the wild, the same thing happens. If you get Tomasello's and Crockford, these are the two guys who are really big on like going out and seeing, okay, like theory of mind, do the great apes have it? Do our closest relatives have it? And they found, I think it was in the Thai reserve, but it might have been a different one, that with chimpanzees, when you go out and they do like alarm call experiments, so they take a big speaker and they have recorded, leopard, sounds or eagle sounds or snake sounds or whatever. And they play these calls, and then they see how the chimpanzees react. And if the group was tight together, like you had a group of closely foraging chimpanzees, alarm calls were far less likely than if they were, dispersed, because they understand that others may be ignorant of the danger.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, or put a plastic snake on the ground. If you only have one who sees it, he's going to alarm call to alert everyone else. But that also tells us that they're like, okay, I've got to warn people who aren't seeing this. Hence, they understand they're not seeing it in the way that they are.
So they have awareness of and want to take care of the group.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. I mean, that's very a super interesting dynamic that occurs, in the wild and also in captivity. So we know that it's not necessarily just a learned behavior. Under sort of a stimulus reward process.
Right. And there's a lot of interesting theories within psychology that regarding, I guess, the emergence of higher consciousness and cognition that have to do with us being cohesive as a social species and being able to interact and be cooperative. And in order to do that effectively, you need to be able to effectively predict what other people or other primates in general, I suppose, or a lot of other mammals, actually. Like there's lots of mammal groups that are very social species and that exist in the like very tight social networks, like, lions and many species of primates, that you need to be able to effectively predict how other people are going to react to your behavior and thus police your behavior accordingly. Otherwise, you risk being ejected from the larger social group. And I think that has a little bit to do with our conceptualizations of morality. Like those are where that emerged from. I mean, we could get into that, but I find it really, really interesting that these sort of, I guess the beginnings of it, or even more developed forms of it, are already visible in other primates, even though they don't have a linguistic model that we can understand. Their behavioral models are incredibly similar when it comes to learning how to interact and recognizing dominance and creating hierarchies and learning to cooperate and taking care of the young and predicting what others might do, it seems as though once you have some sort of prefrontal development that allows for that, it gives you it affords for it. And the better you are at it, the better chance that you're going to retain your membership of that group and then propagate, thus influencing and propagating cognition amongst the species. So the better you are at understanding and interacting and ingratiating yourself upon a group and protecting a group and predicting what other people want, the better chance you have of propagating.
Yeah. Okay, so you and I are for sure on the same page with that. There's some interesting, the world of primatology is always rife with drama and academic infighting and intrigue. It's just this, a bunch of people who love monkeys butting heads constantly.
Perfect.
But recently, we covered this past term, essentially this concept of the social brain hypothesis, which I talked about on Jackson's channel a bit.
Yeah.
It's by this guy, Robin Dunbar. And he basically, the question of, okay, why do primates have such large brains with relation to their body size it's been asked since we even made that connection, right? Because you have tons of mammal species and tons of social mammal species, but none of them have the same ratio that primates do. Even your more basal strepsirrhine primates still have that slight ratio that gets greater and greater as you move, through the haplorhines and then up into the hominoids. So the question is, okay, well, why did primates evolve big brains? What's the driver for that? And Robin Dunbar was the first guy to come out and say, it's sociality. 100% it's sociality, because when you have this group living, you have these incredible social networks that you have to maintain and understand. You have to know who's who. You have to know who's your kin. You have to know who's dominant. You need to know who's submissive. And most importantly, you have to be able to communicate with all of them on the level that is appropriate for your hierarchical standpoint, right? Because obviously you're not going to be, middling around with the dominant male if you're like middle of the pack.
Yeah,
right?
You need to do mental calculus. There's constant cost-benefit analysis with every interaction that you're engaging within. Like humans do it all the time. Anytime you're interacting with somebody, you're doing mental calculus. What does this person want? What does this person think? What is our previous relationship? What's going to happen after we have this conversation? Like, what is my history with them? We do all of this instantaneously and don't even realize it. But in order to maintain, to be in a social species that doesn't just fly to the wind.
Right. And the thing is that living in social groups is an enormous ecological cost, because you increase, obviously, it's this trade-off, this constant natural selection trade-off, as you just mentioned. But it's like when you live in groups, there's constant stress of being around others because of the competition. Right. And competition is like one of the greatest stressors that you can put, on an organism. So that's a heavy price. And so is the disease that comes with living in large groups. Disease pathogens increase once everybody's living in these communal areas. And yet, what's also a huge cost is these huge brains. And yet we have huge brains organisms living in massive groups. And we have a lot of them that have adapted this strategy. Pretty much every haplorhine primate lives in groups of some kind. And orangutans are typically the one we point to when we say, they're solitary. But recent studies have shown that at least from a genetic standpoint, this likely wasn't always the case, that they probably used to live in more conglomerated groups before their habitat started getting as fragmented as it is today. So it's this interesting, question. Okay, well, why are they social and why do they have huge brains? And all of these other models have kind of emerged that it's like, it's diet. Diet does a great job of predicting brain size. But it doesn't do as good of a job of predicting brain size as gestational time does. So the question is, which came first? A long gestational time that lent itself to a large brain and hence sociality, or a slight mutation that required heavy parental care? And so it's this interesting game of like, okay, well, we know that sociality, large brain, and gestational period are all related, but how are they related? And I don't have the answer to that. I mean, I can speculate all day long, but as far as like, this is the definitive answer, I think that even Robin Dunbar himself is kind of more steering towards an integrated model where he's like, yes, it's sociality, social brain hypothesis, but maybe there's something else at play too.
Right.
And it's because these large brains too, there's this idea of the cognitive buffer hypothesis. The bigger your brain, the quicker you are at adapting to environmental change. And so it's like when there's a big, drought with that big brain, you can remember to yourself, oh, you know, I'm pretty sure there were some fruiting bodies the last time there was a slight drought. Maybe I should go back there. You know what I mean? And then you tell the rest of the group.
And then you all migrate together. I don't know if you, I'm sure you have, but I can't remember where it came from. There's this really interesting theory that I heard ages ago, like when I was studying evolutionary psychology, that one of the reasons that our brains were able to kind of evolve better and we were able to more adhere and conglomerate in specific locations is because we developed the ability to cook meat proteins, which helped to preserve them longer and also allowed us to metabolize them faster so that we didn't have to spend all day eating to maintain our bodies a hunter-gatherer. Like, we didn't have to go out and consistently gather food and kind of like spread out as a species. We were able to have people bring food back and kind of stockpile it essentially by cooking it so that it would last a little bit longer, which allowed certain segments of the population to diversify into different tasks that helped the group and that's where roles sort of started to develop and society started to form, because if you found a safe place, if you aggregated as many people as you could in that place and were able to provide sustenance and provide a sustenance through cooked meat protein that you could metabolize very, very quickly, that was very, very nourishing to your brain, we both propagated larger brain size through our new nutrients and also developed more social interaction that was a byproduct of that helped us to better insulate ourselves as a group, and thus had to develop better social interactions, which in turn helped us develop larger brains.
Yeah, and you know, I think you're dead on with that, because there absolutely is a correlation to where we see, and it's hard with paleontology to judge behavior. You know, we do what we can and make these inferences. Like, for instance, Homo habilis, in areas that we find Homo habilis remains, we also find local fauna, their bones with kind of cross marks in them, where they were essentially like carving meat off of this proto tool use. And Homo habilis had a decent sized brain, but after Homo habilis, we almost see, and you know, this is going to sound very, very romantic, but we almost see like this explosion in brain case size.
Right.
I'm not, and we don't see certain fire use, as far as I know, until Erectus. So the question is, okay, well, was it first meat and then cooking meat?
Interesting.
You know, so it was like, was it first this acquisition of sort of a more heavily omnivorous lifestyle?
Yeah.
Because we're seeing something kind of similar in chimpanzees that hunt, right? You know, bonobos hunt less than chimpanzees do. Now, bonobos way outperform chimpanzees with cooperation. They're, you know, the matriarchal make love not war species, whereas chimpanzees, they fight a lot more, and they're patriarchal. They have an alpha male that's kind of in charge of everybody else. Now, the chimpanzees also hunt more than the bonobos do, and because of that, right, they're kind of having to learn this new cooperation that they didn't previously excel at. So the question kind of is meat acquisition really a step along that ladder? And moreover, is it the only step? Because bonobos are more likely to use tools in hunting than chimpanzees are. And it's usually the females who use them too, to kind of compensate for less physical prowess. So there's all these weird little kind of side paths that are like, all right, there isn't one way to reach cognition at the level of humans. Almost certainly.
No.
But I would wager that most pathways hug the pathway that we took, because, you know, natural selection, it's sort of this, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's this easy pathway where it's like, okay, well, first you adapt meat, then you cook it so you get a higher caloric intake, which allows for you to, because, you know, these brains consume, the brains that humans have, they consume so much energy. So you got to feed it somehow, and meat's your best bet. Like you said, you don't want to spend all day foraging.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I find it so fascinating. There's so many really, really cool theories surrounding how our evolutionary pathway was just like a series of fortunate accidents that led us towards socialization and self-awareness. And there's also some evidence that controlling of resources helped to develop better cognitive abilities when it comes to recognition of what other people in your social dynamic wanted, because you need to be able to recognize what somebody else wants in order to be able to kind of ingratiate yourself to them and please them if you want to be one of the people that they're going to delve out those resources to, so that you're not on the outskirts of that society. So that's a direct benefit to you.
Yes, absolutely. And two, something I wanted to mention that you just kind of brought up again, which is absolutely on point, but it's like, you talk about this essential, this greater level of sociality.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much with humans that we started living in larger groups. I mean, we did, but it wasn't so much that as language and symbolism, right? This communication through space and time through like a picture that you drew, right? Or the ability to vocalize in such a way that you can get across abstract ideas. Chimpanzees, to my knowledge, don't have the ability to kind of have a temporal conversation where it's like, yes, last year we found this incredible berry patch over here. It's more of an instinctual response where it's like, oh, well, let me see. Well, this worked last time, but they can't communicate that to others, right? It's like, it's this sort of block. And as far as analyzing the remains that we have, I'm fairly certain that language isn't a certainty until heidelbergensis. Like, there's even some doubts about the extent of which Neanderthalensis could indeed vocalize. Probably could, but certainly not as complex as say modern humans, because they didn't have the laryngeal structures, which I think you can tell decently by the size of the hyoid, which is that little bone that floats kind of unattached at the front of the throat. So there was a recent study as well on monkeys, that because for so long there's been this idea that it's like, okay, in order to speak, it's not really so much of a brain thing as a less anchored tongue and these super sophisticated vocal cords, and that's what allows humans to speak. But a study that was done earlier this year, and I don't have it on me, but I can find it rather quickly if you need to put in the description, showed that monkeys actually, it's more of a cognitive thing. It's more of a neocortex level lack rather than just the physiology. So it's sort of this ability to both understand and give in this sender receiver type fashion, as well as losing, or rather gaining, the physiology that you need to make the required sounds, at least to match, human levels. So it's exactly like you said. It's this perfect series of mishaps where it's like, okay, well, we gained the ability to make these sounds, and we also gained the cognitive ability to understand what these sounds mean.
Yeah, there's really specialized areas in the human brain when it comes to and it's by Broca's and Wernicke's area.
Yeah,
and you can have very specific types of aphasia where if either one of them get damaged, you can either not verbalize or not understand language. And I can't remember which is on which side, but they're both in the temporal area, like near the frontal lobe.
And there's an interesting there's some interesting evidence out there that, like, so for little children, for babies, human babies, like from 1 to 2, their language acquisition is like kind of like that, and then all of a sudden it just skyrockets. And I don't know the exact age of humans. I wish I knew more about, but at that same time, though, there's this rapid cognitive boost in those areas that you just mentioned, and until that point, both their laryngeal structures, their oral and laryngeal structures, and those areas of the brain look very much like a chimpanzee's. That's cool. Which is very interesting. Like, there's this really cool diagram out there if you just look up, chimpanzee infant laryngeal comparison, and it'll show how the way that their tongue is seated in the mouth and how the hyoid bone fits. I mean, it's almost like this sort of Evo-Devo connection.
And then we diverge for whatever reason along that path. You ever wonder what the first word uttered that somebody else recognized must have been? Like, somebody else had an emotional connection to that word and was able to completely say, okay, I know what you mean by that. I'm almost certain, and this is based on nothing other than my own opinions, but I'm almost certain that it would have had to have coordinated with some sort of visual cue. Most of what we communicate to each other has a lot to do with facial expression and body language and tone. Because there's a big difference between me saying, Erika, I'm pretty pumped that you're here today, and me saying, Erika, it's really great that you're here today. You know what
I'm like, oh God.
Right? You can communicate emotion through tone. So I'm really interested in, and you'll never be able to really prove it, but I find it fascinating because I think that a lot of it would have had to do with how the difference between higher pitches and lower pitches and facial expressions transmit like an emotional affect to the recipient of what you're trying to communicate. And the more you do that and the more that it becomes recognized within a species, the better chance that doing it repetitively with a series of sounds, if you're receiving the correct type of response or the response that you're attempting to elicit from your conversation partner, doing that repeatedly would kind of constitute of like a really sort of primary, like primal language.
Yeah, like a proto language.
Yeah, like it would be a way to transmit a feeling to somebody else, to let them know how you feel about them and kind of how you want them to behave, or that you don't like their behavior or you do like their behavior. Because right. You can still do that with children. Like if I yell at a baby, the baby's going to react. They're going to be scared. And if I smile, like babies can recognize and respond to facial expressions very, very early on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, by all means, you go ahead.
I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. I love communication. So if I scream at a baby, baby's going to react. If I make a sweet face at a baby and use a lower tone, the baby's going to be more responsive. And there's evidence that their brain development is very deeply tied to receiving those sorts of positive responses from a parent or from anybody else around them, as opposed to receiving negative responses. You can actually sort of put halts on certain types of cognitive development by using abusive vocal affect with small children. It'll actually halt certain types of cognitive development during that explosive period. And you can do a lot to help to influence that and make it like really like make that branching and pruning process incredibly fruitful for the child, simply by selecting appropriate tones when you're interacting with a baby. So it tells me a lot about how our brains are wired to develop based on how we interact with those around us.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting thing is that a lot of that, there's this line, right, where it's like, okay, well, what is taught and what is innate, right? The nature versus nurture, with behavior. Yeah. But it's like, have you noticed whenever you are excited about something or you see someone new, you raise your eyebrows up, like you're like, oh, hey, the eyebrows up. So that's like an incredibly common facial movement in circumpithecoid primates, but in them, it's more of like a warning. It's like what are you doing? And so
I'm aware of you.
Yeah, it's like, they kind of go, and they push the lips out and raise those eyebrows all of a sudden, and instinctively, you don't have to know anything about them to know, okay, I'm stepping back. So there's this interesting kind of way that we can read other primates' facial expressions without having to be told what those facial expressions mean. But on the other hand, like you mentioned, like when you smile at a baby knows that's they intuitively recognize that as a good thing.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't smile at a chimpanzee, or you'd get the shit kicked out of you.
Really?
Yeah, baring teeth. They, you don't want to show your teeth to them. So when I went to Gombe Stream National Park probably 5 years ago, my freshman year of college. And they brief you before you go in and see the chimpanzees, because it's where Jane did her work. So it's like they're very habituated to humans, but they were basically like, don't make eye contact with them and do not smile at them. Both of those are signs of dominance, and they will get upset. Oh. And so you're like constantly like looking down, and making these submissive gestures. So it's interesting, like that you mentioned that, because there was a study done earlier this year that 46 of the gestures that babies, like the primitive gestures that babies use to kind of like get attention, reaching out, things of this nature, chimpanzees use in similar ways within their troops for communication.
Oh.
So what behaviors, what gestures are innate, and what have changed in humans? What are learned and unique to our species, and why did they become that way? It's such an interesting question to ask.
I never thought about the baring teeth thing, because really that's what you're doing when you're smiling. I wonder if it's kind of a point of diminishing return sort of hypothesis, where being able to kind of bare your teeth to another person is kind of now the reverse. It's almost like saying like, I'm okay. I don't know. That's interesting.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. It's just, I don't know the answer to that. It's just not something that I've contemplated because I don't know a lot about other primate species. And it never crossed my mind that for other species, that's something that we see innately and are socialized to recognize as positive social interaction in an entirely different context is like it's gonna get you smacked.
Yes, and flung back and forth with their incredible strength. I have a hypothesis, but it's very much like speculative on my part.
Don't care. Let's hear it. It's open dialogue. I love this stuff.
Not at all tested. This has not been peer reviewed.
Everything we say is 100% fact. And
100%. This is we're working on creationist rules.
So. That's right. Whatever we say.
So in most primates, with the exception of there are always exceptions to the rules, but in most of the apes, there's sexual dimorphism. And both in the size and most interestingly in the canines. So whenever you have multi-male, multi-female groups, there's intermale competition, where it's basically like males have these big honking canines that they use to fight each other.
Right.
And not necessarily literally. Sometimes it's just like a posturing, like, you see teenage boys when they puff their chests out, that's like a remnant of this behavior of like, I'm posturing that I'm bigger than you. And they bare their teeth, that it's basically saying, look, I'm larger. Or if you've seen gelada baboons, those ones that flip their lip up, and they've got incredible canines. But the closer you move to humans through the hominids, one of the first thing that happens when we look at our we see Sahelanthropus chadensis, which is, supposedly, and I buy into it, but the last common ancestor between humans and chimps. And the canines are smaller than the ones we see in modern chimpanzees. And you move on through Auroran, Tugenensis, and through the Artipus, and those canines get smaller and smaller and smaller. So and then you look at humans, and our canines are like itty bitty, and there's no dimorphism between the sexes of our canines, nor is there any dimorphism through the hominids. So I wonder if this reduction of canines made baring your teeth like automatically moot as an aggressive gesture, because what are you showing?
That's just that you have teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no canines to suggest like, look, I'm going to bite your throat out. So it's almost like you said, like it's this affirmation that it's like, look, I'm not a threat.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the case because, that's not always true. Like gibbons are monomorphic. So females and males have big honking canines, and they're apes too. So I wonder if we had undergone more of from a monomorphic species path, if we'd all still have very large canines. I don't know.
Could it have changed from a competition as that happened to essentially just kind of like a mating display?
It could.
Like it used to be like, I'm big, I'm gonna get this guy I'm in competition with, and it changed to look at me?
It could be, or it also could be that canines maybe got in the way of our more precise vocalizations. Because it wasn't just canines, but we used to, I don't know if you know much about like teeth, but teeth are like the big boys.
I know next to nothing about teeth.
Teeth are like the crown jewel of hominids because they last so long and they can tell you so much about the lifestyle of the animal through like microwear, what did they eat? And like I said, with those canines, if there's no dimorphism between the sexes in the canines, then you can assume that male-male competition wasn't nearly as severe as, say, that which we see, in gorillas, where it's really severe. But in chimpanzees, males' canines are typically larger than females, but not by much. I mean, you would be scared if a female chimpanzee bared her canines at you. They're pretty large.
Right.
So it's interesting that we already see that trend in the great apes, like towards humans. But I almost wonder, too, if it didn't have something to do with the nature of, this is a little risque, but like of human genitals, because we have very well-endowed males and very well-endowed females when compared to the other primates. So it could be that the sexual selection just switched to something, a little more relevant.
I like it. They got in the way of something else. Something very important if you're looking for a mate. Something very, very important if you're looking for.
I mean, and you know, as a male or a female, you're not particularly looking for someone with, you know, the biggest canine.
That's not my first priority. Not my first priority.
It's such a cool question. And there's interesting thing too, where like all other primates, their incisors meet one on top of the other like that, but humans have like overbite, and that allows us to make V sounds and F sounds.
So our jaw size and the way that our teeth come in, or our jaw structure, I should say, and the way our teeth came in, has evolved to select for better abilities for language
and enunciation, like to be clear, and not mutter, you know. And we can make all these different incredible sounds and string them together, but you'll think this is really, I think you'll think this is fascinating, because I thought it was fascinating. But vervet monkeys, which are very, you know, basal, circumpithecoid, or not circumpithecoid, old world primate. So they're ground apes, they're ground monkeys. They're not platyrrhines, but they live in like South Africa, etc. But they have specific calls for specific predators, and they also can joint those calls with other calls that tell you where the predator is coming from.
Right.
You know, so they at least understand that you can string together different calls to mean different things, which kind of suggests that it's like perhaps the selection for the physiology was less important than the selection for stringing those concepts together in a coherent way.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's very important and very useful. To say, oh, like, you know, leopard, and then that's all great, fine and dandy, but where's the leopard coming from?
Right.
You know, if they leopard above, then you know that it's coming down from the trees onto you and everybody should scatter. But if it's coming from the ground, everybody needs to get up in the trees.
Right. Yeah.
So it's cool stuff.
And that is sort of like a proto-form of language. Like if you're able to utter a sound or make a movement and have other, you know, members of your species understand that concept and know how to react appropriately to it, that's a form of language. Mm-hmm. Like that's a manner of communicating, at the very least, even if you don't consider it complex enough to be a language, it's a manner of communicating. Sure. So
yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting to look at that overlap, because when you look at species that I guess from our perspective, from our incredibly selfish perspective, are less, you know, developed cognitively than us, and you see that, it must kind of be a callback to, oh, okay, like there must have been something akin to that or like that we were first, you know, doing with one another, and that led us to here. So, you know, hopefully, like maybe it'll be Planet of the Apes in like another million years.
Well, I mean, technically, the Planet of the Apes now, we're not doing very good of a job of it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, fair enough.
Very much dystopian to all of the other apes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and the question is, you know, if given enough time and you know the correct pressures, would say vervet monkeys develop into an organism that has more complex sounds? Because like, okay, so one of the I don't mean to throw shade on geladas, but one of the less linguistically endowed primates would be geladas, gelada baboons. They're the ones that flip their lips. They live on like the Ethiopian highlands. And for a long time we were kind of like, all right, they don't really do much. They eat a lot of grass. They're gramnivores. They're like they're the only primates that subsist entirely on like grass, not even leaves. They just peruse the plains and just eat, you know, a shit ton of grass.
Yeah.
Which is so weird. But they do, and they get along just fine. No one else is trying to eat the grass. But so there's this linguistic law called Menzerath's law. And it's essentially the general premise is that it's like, if you're going to say a long sentence, you're going to use shorter words. And if you're going to say a short sentence, you're probably going to use a single longer word if you can. It's this efficiency of the message. And one of my supervisors back at Roehampton co-authored a paper that analyzed gelada cries and their sort of chittering that they do at each other. And they found that they follow Menzerath's law.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And so the question is, okay, if the most sort of basal form of communication amongst the primates follows Menzerath's law, is that sort of the first step for language and call specifics and this sort of more high level communication? I don't know, but it seems like it would be this concept of like getting a message across in the most efficient way possible. It's like the core of every human language, and we all tend to follow it. And I would find it a fascinating experiment if you compared primate communication, across multiple genera to see if do all of them follow the same law. Because that would be really interesting.
Yeah, to see if it's like a precursor. And,
right.
And to what to, yeah, that's really cool. That's real.
Yeah, so it's this fascinating like idea of, I'd never even considered it before my professor showed us this paper that he co-authored, but he was like, there are so many linguistic laws that sort of have to be abided by to get efficient language, not just language in general, but efficient communication. So if you're dealing with a species that is very communication heavy, which I would personally say that any species that relies on high sociality has to have very good communication. You have to. How else are you going to communicate with your constituents? Right. So it would be interesting to see if you can maybe map a gradient of like the acquisition of certain linguistic laws as you go from the more basal primates to the more derived ones. And then finally us, because we made all the laws.
That's right. that we're applying to the other species that we're examining.
Exactly. Horrifically anthropomorphizing them into oblivion.
That's right. Everything is like us, and everything must be measured against us, because that's how it works. Exactly. Speaking of which, we've been at it for about 50 minutes or so. I'm going to take questions in a little bit if anybody has questions. If they're super chats, I'll of course read them, so long as they're respectful and nice and relevant, or just praising us, because I'll always read those.
And we deserve it.
If not at me, but don't do it just yet, because I do want to bring up one more topic. Hopefully we can jam it in a little bit. I know you have a little bit more time. I want to talk a little bit about moral systems, like what you see in the way of moral systems, because that's just a subject matter that fascinates me as much as cognition and linguistic communication and communication abilities do. Do you see the precursors or sort of proto-moral systems developing in amongst other types of primates, and what do they look like? Are they similar? Are they dramatically different? What are they based on?
Yeah, I mean, so the first kind of question, that you can ask is like, all right, are we talking like with basal morals? Is it like the understanding? I think you could maybe very vaguely describe it as like the understanding that X behavior is bad and X behavior is good. And in that aspect, it's like, obviously we don't see, certain primate species, just for no reason blatantly killing one another. And we do see the emergence of sort of complex bad emotions, or rather bad morals, such as like deception. That occurs in very basal primates, where it's like, but it's interesting because it's very regulated. Because if everybody's deceiving, there's no one to deceive.
Yeah.
But if no one's deceiving, then there's kind of this exploitable niche where you can say, all right, let's deceive. And we also see punishment for deceivers. So if other primates, like vervet monkeys are a great example because they are dirty little liars all the time. But so if vervet monkeys, usually it's juveniles, start overusing deceit, because let's say you've got this big troop of vervet monkeys and they're all enjoying this patch of fruit. And then a little juvenile's like, well, what if I alarm call for a leopard? And then they do so, and everybody goes up into the trees, and then they exploit all the resources. If there's no leopard, it's sort of a boy who cried wolf situation. One, they stop getting listened to, and then also the next time they cry and nothing happens, the dominant males and females will come and beat that interloper up. They will not be very kind to him or her. Usually it's the males. But so it's kind of interesting, this idea of like, okay, well, what level of understanding do they have that this is a wrong thing to do versus this just harmed me and I don't like it? And I don't know the answer. I mean, we know that mourning occurs too in the great apes. So we know that there's this concept of like, all right, well, death is bad. And death is also sad. And we don't like it. And we see comforting, we see higher sharing levels from other males and females in chimpanzees and bonobos when, say, there has been a death of an infant, of one of the females. There's more food sharing, there's more comfort gestures and things like this. Because I think morality, the very basis of it, comes from emotion.
And empathy. An ability to empathize with what somebody else might be feeling and how what you're doing affects the larger group.
Right. So I think that when we say, do we see morality, we see the very basal precursors of it, and that it's not like they're saying, getting together, and gesturing to one another and saying, okay, these are the rules. But we do see punishment of bad behavior in basal primates. And then we see high levels of empathy in your hominoids, where they really do appear to understand that something very bad has happened to someone that they like, and that makes them feel bad.
So there's a demonstration of empathy, because at the core, I think a lot of morality, or what we conceptualize as morality, and people will argue with me about this for days and days and days, is a system of group behavioral control in order to force people or encourage people to adhere to the standards that we've set arbitrarily or otherwise for the society that we currently exist within. And a lot of that is based on empathetic inclinations, like the ability to know, I don't want this to happen to me, so I don't want you doing it to other people, because if you can do it to that person and get away with it, you can do it to me, and I don't want that. And if it means that I don't get to do it either, then that's fine, so long as people aren't doing it to me and or my family, and all of us can get along. And if everybody keeps doing it, none of us are going to get along, and I need this group around me to, protect me and insulate me, and I like the interactions that I'm having when we all get along. So, let's just set some standards here so that we can go along and get along, because otherwise everything flies into anarchy. And it seems like we think that that's sort of like a unique human inclination, and we label that morality. But you can see if what you're saying, because I'm sure what you're saying is accurate, but if you track what you're saying, it seems that that's something that within other primate social species you see vestiges of. You see something that's similar. You see them saying, well, don't do this because look what just happened to everybody, or I don't like it. I'm going to either cast you out or give you a bit of a beating, some sort of punishment, to make sure that you're averse to engaging in this behavior in the future.
Right. And you mentioned the word policing earlier, which is I think that's a perfect way to describe it, because it's basically like you've got sort of the dominant individuals who are typically much older, especially in matriarchal species. Like there are many species of macaque, which are kind of like your matriarchal, sometimes, usually, analog to baboons, which tend to be very patriarchal. And to a very mean degree, especially Hamadryas baboons. I do not like those guys. They are rude.
Oh, okay.
But you see this policing of behavior where the older individuals who have lived longer and understand consequences to behaviors will get involved if the situation is running awry in smaller groups. So if there's conflict for no reason, perhaps the dominant female or the dominant male may come down and intervene and break the situation up, because they understand exactly what you're saying. Behavior has consequences for the group. And where how deep that goes, I'm not sure, but they certainly understand that it's like, if this happens, bad things will happen, not just to everybody, but more specifically to me and mine. And I don't want that to happen. So it's this combination of policing for the group and then empathy for the individual, right?
Yeah. And it would be contextualized based on what's going on in your environment and how it's been, conceptualized, how it's been constructed that this group interacts well. That may not always be the best choice for how a group can interact, but it's been what's previously worked until you can demonstrate otherwise. So people want to adhere conservatively to that sort of standard. And I think primates would probably be similar. I mean, I'm no expert in primates. I'm not even really an expert in people by any stretch of the imagination. But
don't believe that. I think you know a ton about, more than I do about people, for sure. But I think you're right, because it's like, we tend to think that it's like, all right, why do organisms act different? Because they look different. But we have, species of macaques that live geographically in overlapping ranges, but they found different social means to react to different situations. I mean, you have Tonkin's macaques, right, that live in Indonesia, and they're really chill and egalitarian, and none of them want to mess with each other. And there's a lot of affiliative grooming and like, let's work it out, man. Like, we don't want any trouble, And then in the exact same environment, you've got crab-eating macaques, sometimes called long-tailed macaques, and they're like fighting tooth and nail constantly, and their hierarchies are consistently in flux, and it's never about love, it's always about war, and they live in the same area, and they look so similar, different coat colors and things like that. But it's really interesting because you're totally right, similar to how cultures in human societies come up with different solutions to different social problems, so do other primates. And for all intents and purposes, they all work kind of in different ways, and they all to varying degrees are good or bad for the group or the individual. So it comes with this idea of like, how do we optimize, in humans at least, group living? How do we optimize our group living? Can we look to other primates? I don't know. I mean, Tonkin's macaques don't get a lot done, but crab-eating macaques are always killing each other. So there's got to be a happy medium.
Yeah, well, we do a fair bit of killing each other, unfortunately.
That's super right now.
Yeah, but we segregate too. Like we're very good at othering each other. Like that's one thing that humans excel at is being able to dehumanize other humans, being able to other them to a degree that you no longer see the humanity in them because you see them as so distinct from who you are and who your group is that they're either a threat or not considered on the same level as you. So that's how we justify treating each other crappy. But we always do need that justification. And it seems like even within these social structures amongst other primates, there's always, whether we'll agree that it's good or bad or would want to track it onto us, that they find these justifications. It may be fighting for resources, it may be fighting for mates, but it all has to do with the justifications. So there's similarities there. The difference is that we think better of our justifications because we're big brain people.
Yeah.
So that's right. So our justification are big brain justifications that are justified, whereas other people or other primates are just, dumb in comparison to us. And they may be from a cognitive standpoint, but once you recognize the fact that a lot of these proto-systems kind of track on and that we're in fact primates too and great apes, that maybe there's some similarity in that. And if we have some recognition of where those sorts of cognitions come from and what the foundations are for us, we can better analyze whether or not those are good or bad decisions, and how our visceral responses may track by looking at these other species and saying, oh, okay, well, there's negative consequences when they provide justifications based on X reasons, and a little bit more positive justifications when, like we can do some analysis that instead of anthropomorphizing us onto them, we can maybe anthropomorphize them onto us and do a little bit more introspection, just of course, out of intrigue.
Well, and you mentioned too, it's like how we other entire groups, and it's like the fastest way to cure someone who others another group of people is for that individual to come to know a member of the other on a personal level.
Right.
And to kind of say, oh, all right, if this person is okay, then the other group is more okay in my eyes. And something very similar happens in olive baboons. They're female philopatric, so they keep the females stay in their natal group where they're born, and males at a certain age get kicked out and have to go join a new troop. And in olive baboons, the way that new males tend to join new groups is they pick a female to become friends with, and they become friends with her, and frequently there's not even like a sexual undertone. Like they may not ever mate.
It's just like a platonic friendship to get their foot in the door for the group.
Exactly. And it's actually, the scientific terminology is literally a friendship. They form a friendship with a female, and then the female essentially is his into the group if she likes him. And in return, he'll help protect her young from infanticide from other males, even though the young is, not even theirs. But they basically come in and they're like, hey, I'm good, I promise. And that female basically saying to the rest of the troop, no, he's good with me, so we should let him in. Very much tracks to humans where it's like, no, this individual is good, so that group is good with us, you guys. Like, that's fine.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So we don't have any super chats, but if anybody has any questions, now start tagging me. The last one that I saw that's up on my screen is from Mary Ann Maraniski. I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. And it said, I just want to say that I have really been enjoying the stream. The theories and points brought up have all been very interesting. So thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Good. Yay. Glad it's not just us. This was a very selfish conversation for me. So I'm glad it was interesting. If anybody else has any questions at me, what is happening is the last question I saw. We're having a conversation. That's what is happening.
Yeah, it's a little wild. I know it can get a little wild. It's not really an easy one to just kind of jump in the middle of.
That's a lot to digest. You may want to start from the beginning. So do you have anything else that you would like to add before, just in case anybody has any questions? If not, then we'll sign off.
I mean, I just had a great time. I honest to God, this has been a blast. I could talk about this to forever. I know you can too.
Oh, I love it.
It's just so much fun to kind of talk and hypothesize about this kind of thing. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's totally cool, because those people will go on and find interesting things about stuff that maybe isn't our cup of tea, but we still need to know about it. So just thanks for having me on. I guess I had a blast.
I'm really glad that you're here. Like, I'm very, very pleased. Oh, apparently my mic is echoing. Sorry. I don't know what I did. I did see. Oh, great. Thanks, Doorknob Head. Doorknob Head says great discussion, and thanks. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm technologically... I even got a new thing for my microphone. I have this whole, like, guard thing that I got for Christmas. Classic Shannon. Something's always got to go wrong. So I'm very sorry, everybody, but I will stop talking for a second. So for anybody who tuned in late, Erika can let everybody know who she is and where to find her. So please.
Yeah, sure. I go by Gutsick Gibbon, Gutsick on YouTube, and then my Twitter is the same thing, but there's an underscore between the two words. I have an Instagram that I'm not very active on, but same thing. I mostly just post there sometimes with like funny memes that I find, but I also post those on Twitter. So
cool. Oh, now we have questions.
Okay.
Jessica Livingston. Oh, this is a comment. Thank you. Jessica says this has been so interesting, so interesting, and I want more. Oh, well, go tune into her channel, and maybe we'll have a follow-up conversation sometime.
Yeah, I would be game anytime.
So Tubian323 said, my question isn't anything complicated. I'm just curious why you call yourself Gutsick Gibbon.
I've been asked that a couple of times recently. It's not an interesting story. I doodle a lot. I like to draw cartoons, and I drew gibbons are my favorite primate. They have I'm kind of starting to get into certain species of macaques because that's what I'm writing my thesis on. So I guess maybe I should have picked a different name, but I drew a gibbon that was ill, and then I gave him a little tea to hold in his hand. So he's gut sick. He's sick to his guts, I guess. And then I was like, that's kind of funny. I guess I'll make that my mascot. And then I was like, wow, what a mistake. It's not a good story to like wrap around your username. I should have picked something different, but now I'm stuck with it. So
you could be the type of idiot that didn't think anybody would ever subscribe to her channel and just named it your name.
I picked it for my Reddit username, which is the same thing because I'm involved there's a cool subreddit called Debate Evolution over there, which is a little bit non-accurate because everybody on there just accepts evolution, and then it's for busting newcomers who are like, what about intelligent design? And then you're like, let me tell you a little bit about that. Hand-wringing comments. Exactly. It's a fun subreddit to browse, though. It's got a lot of like just quick answers for kind of lame creationist questions that you tend to get asked when kind of running in this circle of like, I love evolution. It's my favorite thing. And then half the audience is like, oh, cool, I don't believe in it. So
yeah, it's great. Okay, so there's a few more questions now coming in. But I just want to say before we get to the next question, my best friend, her name is Sarah. She is a PhD in biology. She actually studies conservational ecology, and she's not in this world at all. And right. I explained to her kind of a little bit of what Paul from Paulogia does more than what I do. Yeah. I don't really get into and she was like, what do you mean? And she's like, but evolution's, like there's all of these sects of of science that just couldn't exist, like, and are predicated upon concepts that have been tried, tested, and true in evolution. That like there's whole like, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't know how to explain it to you, Sarah. I don't. It's but I'm not kidding. It's like it's real and it's prevalent.
And it's problematic because there's so many people that, like, you know, who knows how many, the untold numbers of potentially incredible biologists and geologists and paleontologists out there that can't do, you know, basically what they were made to do, because they don't accept evolution, because they were, you know, kind of brainwashed in like a whatever Southern Baptist church or something along those lines. But it's the same in the UK. When, you know, I told a close friend over there, I was like, yeah, I do, you know, YouTube channel where sometimes I like talk about, you know, how creationism is dumb. And they're like, creationism? Isn't that like just a US thing? And I was like, no, it kind of is, because it's not really a problem in the UK. They're all okay with it. But yeah, let's make that a non-problem, shall we?
Yeah. Okay. More questions. Sorry, I was. Side. No, my bad. So Matthew says, glad to see Erika in the community so soon after meeting you with Jackson. Great talk. Yeah, Jackson Wheat's another great channel.
Jackson Wheat's awesome. He knows his stuff, man.
Inside out. Oh, Paulogia has a question for you. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Paul.
What's Erika's takeaway from chatting with Kent Hovind?
Oh my God. Honestly, my takeaway is you gotta have some variety if you're gonna have the same script. You know, if Kent, this is my suggestion to Kent, is alter the script, my dude. Like, you've got to get a little bit of variety in there. Because I've said this, you know, a dozen times, but it's like I watched Untold Kent content. Like, my brain was, you know, Kent Hovind Central, watching all his you know, debates and stuff like that. I could have watched one and gotten the same effect. And that's so brutal. And also the fact that so many people commented on modern day debate. There were a ton of encouraging comments, but there were also some that were like, there was one specific comment that I guess I would consider my takeaway. It said, creationism always wins, so Kent wins. And I thought to myself, what a sad way of thinking. To start with your presupposition and work backwards, you know. And I almost had the feeling, I was like, well, you know, I mean, watching the conversation just doesn't matter sometimes to individuals like that. So my takeaway would be like, you can't change anybody's mind. They have to want to change it themselves to even be receptive.
Yeah, but sometimes just chipping away at it and being patient and presenting that information, you know, one day that little chip might finally be, you know, that you might pull the last string in that tapestry that finally unravels it. And
yeah,
like you just never know. The best thing to do is just keep plugging away at putting out the good information and being patient and having the good conversations. Yeah. And I really respected your dialogue style with him. Like, I just, you are so patient. And I wish that he'd answered you, because your tact of essentially saying that, okay, so you understand genetics when it comes to DNA testing, when it comes to, you know, paternity, let's say, for example, right. Like the principles that are applied to that are the same principles that are applied when we're looking at relationships between species. Why do you accept it in this scenario and not in the other scenario? And he was like, yeah, so do you think the butterflies give birth to anteaters? And you were like, that's not what I'm saying.
My brain, the closest my brain came to exploding was the third time I asked the question. I said, okay, where do you draw the line? That's not with analogies, you know, not with comparison to Microsoft Word or to cars, but where do you draw the line with regard to genetics? Okay. And he goes, well, in the Green Mile. And I was like, oh my God, Kent, why are you talking about the Green Mile? What the hell does the Green Mile have to do with it? But you're right. I mean, that's very similar to Paul's journey, right? I mean, Paul and I had a brief DM conversation on Twitter, but, you know, I mean, he knows all about that incredible kind of path of
constant affirmation, and then one day something happens.
Right.
And the thing is, when you're talking to Kent, Kent's not talking to you. He is talking to his audience. He is getting out his tropes. He has no intention of addressing fuck all that you say. None. Yeah. Whatsoever. No. He's just waiting for an opportunity to get out his tropes to say dogs don't give birth to young dogs. And why do you think that I'm related to a mosquito and a rot? Like, you think that
whales and pine trees, dogs and pineapples. Like it's and the fact that we can sit here and like bust his chops about these tropes is very telling. I mean, it's a record going over and over and over again. And then he'll say some, shit like, well, I understand the law of monophily, and then in the same breath talk about how you're going to tell me a dog's going to produce a non-dog, and you're like, okay, then you don't understand it.
Doesn't.
He
just has a very carefully cultivated slideshow that's effective to the group of people that he wants to speak to.
Right.
And he just wants as many opportunities as he can to present that slideshow to as many people as possible.
Well, and what pisses me off too, and I'm sorry if we got questions to get to, just kind of like a quick anecdote, but it pisses me off that he's so linked, like, he's like, it's, whatever, like, oh, what God says versus like what fallible humans say, and I want to be like, you mean your interpretation of kind of what you think that God says, because the hundreds of denominations that disagree with you kind of casts some doubt on that. But he does that so that he can indoctrinate people into this idea of, if you don't believe what Kent says, you're going to hell.
Yeah, you're against God.
Yeah, and that blows my mind when you've got guys like Francis Collins out here, who's like a devout Catholic who's doing incredible work in the evolutionary biology community, or Jack Horner, right? I mean, and you're kind of just like, well, whatever. I mean, if you want to draw that line, that's fine, but you're really hurting a lot of people.
Yeah, he
said it best. That's what's driving people out of the church.
Yeah, and he debated my friend Cy Gart too, who's very devout. Like, when you were, you watched all of that.
I love that guy.
Cy's good people. Like, we disagree on most anything related to religion. Cy, but he's good people, right? And he's like, and he does good science. Like, he's a scientist. So he just, you can do it. But Kent just says essentially that Cy's not a Christian. Like, he's going to hell, even though he's essentially an evangelist.
Yeah,
he's going to hell just because he believes in facts.
Yeah, and these are facts that Kent, utilizes every single day. The medicine that he takes, right? The food that is put on his plate. Like, my favorite thing is when he says things like, every farmer in America relies on your dumb theory not working. A cow is always going to produce a cow. And I'm like, do you have any idea that the fact that every, food item that we eat today is a product of artificial selection, which is evolution? So every farmer, literally, that is, every word in that sentence is untrue. Yeah. Every farmer relies on evolution working every day of their life. And so do we all. I mean, so all of us do.
Yeah, set cows free in the wild and see what will happen. They've been domesticated over centuries by us, utilizing the principles of evolution in order for us to be able to better breed them and produce the type of meat that we want. Like, we've relied on that theory in order for that to take place. But they do still give birth to cows. I get, like, so. It just doesn't make any sense. And you're debating standing for truth soon too, so that should be.
Yeah,
You're a masochist.
I guess I really do just hate myself. Because I'm ready. I've consumed quite a bit of standing material recently, and it's very similar to the Kent stuff. It's just that shoddy book Replacing Darwin by Nathaniel Judson. It's just that. I mean, that's all he talks about, and that and Sanford and Tompkins, both of which are, unmitigated hacks on every level. I've looked at that. It is bad science on every level. And I'm a master's student. I am not a scientist, nor am I an expert on this stuff. But, an undergraduate, for instance, could tell that all of that is just bad science. They omit data. They alter data, and they can't interpret very basic concepts in biology. So it's like, whatever, but Standing's really into it. So
yeah. One of the first videos I ever did on YouTube was on Paulogia's channel, and it was about Tompkins' comparison of the human chimp DNA. And that was the day that I found out that the Answers Research Journal existed. And I am not a biologist, but I love research methodology. So I looked at the article and I was like, this has the artifice of science with no science held with it. Like the methods section of a biology was like a paragraph and a half long, and most of it was talking about the version of Excel that he used to analyze the data.
Oh my God.
It was fluff. It was fluff. Oh my God. It was, I lost my mind. I lost my mind so much that Paul put me on the video, because I was like, here's all of this stuff. He cited himself 7 times and there was only 14 citations.
In an academic paper, show up with 4 citations and get ready to get absolutely at warp speed out of the scientific community. 14 citations.
And 5 to 7 of them were him citing himself.
You're kidding me.
No.
Tompkins, my guy.
It was bad. And then our friend Ruhi, he reran the analysis on the computer software he used and discovered that he had essentially like kind of p-hacked it almost, but he ran it through a couple of times with information missing. Yes, I think that's what it was. I don't know enough about it, but Ruhi like did a massive breakdown. This guy Glenn, like he omitted certain pairings in the genetic sequencing in order to skew the statistical results to 70% value instead of like a 90 to 98 to 99% comparison between human and chimp DNA. It was, that's the day that I found out that type of shit existed, and I
well, and there's a reason that they don't peer review, and that's it. That's the reason.
You can select your own peer reviewer. Have you ever read their crap? I went and read it. And when you submit a paper, you say, these are the people I would like to peer review my paper. And they have a specific list of people who are allowed, and they have to be on that list. And if they're not on that list, you have to submit something saying that they will adhere to the statement of faith before they're allowed to go on the peer review list.
Oh my God.
It's bananas.
And that statement of faith is so narrow, I mean, oh my God. And then you've got, that's exactly the problem, right? Because you've got guys like Andrew Snelling out here, the geologist for the Answers Research Journal.
He sometimes puts out good stuff.
Well, the thing is that Snelling, in his conventional science world, he abides by conventional geology. And of course his reasoning for, everyone's like, oh, well, why don't you just do all your research for the Answers Research Journal? And he's straight up like, they don't pay me enough. Because that's not a surprise to me. When you're putting so much money into your merch for the Ark Encounter.
And your homeschooling curriculum.
Yeah. I mean.
People have questions and we've been bantering. Sorry, about insider baseball. Sorry, guys. All right, Andrew said, also, can you ask her for some good books, materials, resources on debunking creationist claim? My 8-year-old niece is really interested in this field, but it's hard to find books that are on her level.
Oh man, get the Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. It's great for geology. It's literally written. The interesting thing is it's written by a panel of people who are, some of which are religious geologists who accept conventional geology, and some of which are completely secular and also accept, obviously, conventional geology. It's full of awesome pictures and diagrams, and I think that it's very easy to understand. If I was 8, I think I probably would have been able to grasp the concepts. It also gets a little bit into like fossils and paleontology. As far as biology goes, honestly, I think the best resource for that is an age-appropriate textbook that teaches like the fundamental concepts of evolution, because that's where most people go astray. Most of these creationists have no idea of what evolution even is. But for specific creationist claims, you can't do much better than for that level than Grand Canyon Monument to an Ancient Earth. You can find it on Amazon. It's really affordable. I recommend it to anybody just because I love bringing it up in conversations with creationists and being like, this is literally by a panel of people that includes Christians, and they all disagree with you. So very, very good book, though. I recommend it. For higher levels, anything by Dawkins is great. Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne is awesome. The Fossils, What They Say and Why It Matters by Proto-moral is great. Yeah, there's a ton. Also, The Moral Animal, if you're interested in any evolutionary psych stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I think we might be out of questions, and I could just talk for hours. So I'm going to end the stream. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And Erika's link is in the description. Later on, I'm going to grab her resources, so they won't be there right away, but I'm going to put the resources down there, between now and eternity. I don't know, whenever I get around to it. So they'll be there. Check back in a day or two. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And as always, help elevate the discourse. Bye guys.